The doctor closed the file, and when she looked at Margaret, there was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Mrs. Peterson," she began, "I'm afraid the results are worse than we'd hoped." Margaret gripped the handle of her purse tightly with both hands and waited. "Pancreatic cancer," the doctor continued. "Advanced stage. You have approximately 4 months, maybe a bit more," but she trailed off. Margaret nodded slowly and said, "I understand," her voice coming out calm. When she walked out of the doctor's office, Boston's November cold hit her face. She took her phone out of her pocket. She had 3 children: David, Susan, Emily. She should call all of them, tell them all. Her finger hovered over David's number. Then she put the phone back in her pocket. That night when she got home, she opened her suitcase, but she didn't pack clothes. She packed maps, journals, her memories. She turned on her computer and searched Maine coastal towns rental houses. Because Margaret had made a decision, she wasn't going to tell anyone. She was going to disappear. And 6 months later, when the same doctor saw this woman again, she wouldn't believe her eyes. Because the woman sitting across from her was no longer that helpless, exhausted Margaret. She had become someone else. But that night, Margaret didn't know any of this. That night, she only knew that she needed to escape, that she needed to live not for everyone else but for herself. And the next morning, she disappeared. When Margaret left the doctor's examination room, her heart was pounding, but her face remained calm, because in her 68 years of life, she had learned very well how to hide her emotions. As she walked through the hospital corridor past nurses, doctors, and patients, no one could tell that she had just received a death sentence. She got on the elevator and saw herself in the mirror. Gray hair, thin glasses, pale face, blue jacket, a 68-year-old woman. Ordinary, invisible, quiet, just as she had always been. When she reached the parking lot, she got in her car and listened to the engine sound, which suddenly seemed very loud. Outside, the November wind was shaking the trees and leaves were falling to the ground. Margaret took out her phone and opened her contact. David, her son, 42 years old, a lawyer living in New York. Susan, her daughter, 40 years old, a teacher in Connecticut. Emily, the youngest, 38 years old, an architect still living in Boston. All 3 were good people, good children, who loved their mother. Her finger touched David's number, but she didn't press it. She imagined what she would say. "David, I was at the doctor today. There's bad news. Pancreatic cancer. I have 4 months." David would come immediately. Susan would come too. Emily was already in the city and would arrive that day. They would all gather around her, cry, make plans, hospital appointments, treatment options, who would stay which days. Mother won't be left alone. Margaret closed the phone and put it in her pocket. She started the car and drove home. That evening, she sat at home and thought. Margaret Peterson, 68 years old, widow, retired librarian. Robert had died 5 years ago from a heart attack. They had been married for 43 years. Had it been a good marriage? She didn't know. Robert was a good man, a good father, but he was a quiet man who didn't show his emotions. Margaret was quiet too. They were compatible. Their children had grown up, left home, and built their own lives. Margaret had worked at the library for 35 years. She loved books and loved the silence. Every day she would sit at the same desk, catalog books, and help students. She was a good employee, reliable, disciplined. She had retired 3 years ago and now lived alone in this big house on a quiet street in a Boston suburb. She went to the bookshelf and took down a box from the top shelf. Inside were old photographs. Margaret in her 20s, university years, long hair, smiling face, bright eyes. In one photo, she was at the beach, on the Maine coast with friends. Sunset, wave sounds. In another photo, she was in the mountains with a backpack, free. Young Margaret loved adventure, went hiking, explored new places. Then she had met Robert when she was 24. Robert was 26, an engineer, a serious man. His family had approved of her. "He'll make a good husband," they had said. Margaret had liked him too. He was reliable, responsible. They got married. David was born, then Susan, then Emily. Margaret continued working, but her life changed. There was no more adventure, no more hiking, no more exploration. Children, Work, home, responsibilities. One day she had said to Robert, "Let's go to Maine, to the beach, just you and me." Robert had said, "Maybe in the summer." But summer came, and they didn't go. "The children are young," Robert had explained. "Maybe in a few years." A few years later, they still didn't go. There was always something: work, schools, hospitals, responsibility. Now Margaret was 68, Robert was dead, and she had 4 months. She turned on her computer and typed into Google, "Maine coastal towns rental houses." She searched for hours, finding small towns: Rockland, Camden, Bar Harbor. Then she found an even smaller place: Stonington, a small fishing village at the tip of a peninsula with a population of 1,000. She saw a listing: small house, overlooking the ocean, available for winter months, $800 per month. Margaret clicked on the ad, a small white house with large windows facing the ocean. It was perfect. She sent an email. "Hello, I would like to rent your house for 6 months. Is that possible?" The next morning a reply came, "Yes, that's possible. When would you like to move in?" Margaret wrote, "Within a week." That week, Margaret prepared by talking to the bank and setting up automatic bill payments. She told her neighbor, "I'm going on vacation for a few months." The neighbor asked where to, and Margaret lied easily, saying Maine, to stay with a friend. She packed her suitcase with clothes, books, and journals, but she didn't pack Robert's old photo album. She only took her own youth photographs. She sent a group message to her children. "Dear children, I want to tell you something. I'm going on vacation for a few months. I need some time alone. I've been going through difficult times since your father died, and I want to take some time for myself. I'll be staying with a friend in Maine. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'll call from time to time. I love you, Mom." Within minutes, the responses started coming in. David, "Mom, are you sure? Alone for so long?" Susan, "Mom, which friend? Do we know them?" Emily, "Mom, I'll stop by. Let's talk." Margaret wrote the same thing to all of them. "I'm fine. Don't worry. I just need some time. I'll call you." The next morning, she left early in her old but reliable Honda. From Boston to Stonington was 250 miles, about 5 hours of driving. She headed north on Interstate 95 into Maine, where the landscape changed from cities to towns, from towns to forests, from forests to the coast. She arrived in Stonington in the afternoon. The town was small, really small. A main street, a few shops, a market, a cafe, a fish restaurant, a harbor with fishing boats. It was quiet and calm. It was November, and tourist season was over. Margaret looked at the map and found the house at the tip of the peninsula, a bit away from other houses. A small white house overlooking the ocean. The landlord was an old man named Mark, in his 70s, who greeted Margaret and gave her the keys. "Call if you need anything," he said. "It gets quiet here in winter, with very few people staying, but it's beautiful." Margaret thanked him and Mark left. She toured the house, which was small. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom with old but clean furniture. Large windows with a magnificent view. The ocean stretched endlessly in shades of gray and blue, with waves hitting the shore. Margaret stood at the window and listened to the sound of waves, wind, and seagull cries with no other sounds, just silence. The first night Margaret lay in bed and watched the stars through the window. You couldn't see stars in Boston because of too much light, but here the sky was full of them. Before falling asleep, Margaret thought, "I have 4 months and I'm going to spend these 4 months here, alone, for myself." The next morning, she woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window looking at the ocean as the sun rose, painting the sky pink and orange. Margaret put on a thick jacket and went outside where it was cold but invigorating. She walked to the beach, which was rocky with stones, mussel shells, and seaweed. Margaret walked slowly and breathed in the smell of the sea, salt and freedom. The first days, Margaret just walked, going to the beach every morning and walking for hours. She would go to town, buy bread, cheese, and fruit from the market, and wouldn't talk much to anyone. Just "good morning, thank you," and then leave. People didn't look at her because Margaret was an invisible woman, as she had always been. In the evenings, she would sit at home and read. At Robert's house, she had never had time to read, because there was always something to do: cooking, cleaning, laundry. Now she had time and read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Virginia Woolf for hours. After a week, she started keeping a journal, even though years had passed since she'd written. Now she wrote every night about her day, her thoughts, her feelings. Today I walked on the beach for a long time. The waves were high and the wind hit my face. I felt alive. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. 2 weeks later, David called to ask, "Mom, how are you?" And Margaret replied, "I'm fine, really fine." David asked, "We miss you. When are you coming back?" And Margaret said, "I don't know, not yet." David worried and asked, "Mom, are you really okay? Did something happen?" Margaret reassured him, "No, honey, I just needed some time. Do you understand?" David didn't understand but said, "Okay, Mom, we love you." Susan called, Emily called, and Margaret told them all the same thing. "I'm fine, don't worry." But in truth, Margaret was changing. In the 3rd week, Margaret went into the ocean, even though it was November and the water was freezing cold. She took off her boots, rolled up her pants, and walked in. The water burned her feet, but Margaret didn't care as she went deeper with waves hitting her legs. Margaret smiled. For the first time in 50 years, she was doing something like this, something crazy, illogical, just to feel. In the 4th week, the townspeople began to recognize Margaret. Tom, the market owner, commented, "You walk every morning, very disciplined," and Margaret replied, "I love it." Linda, the waitress at the cafe, laughed and observed, "You always order the same thing, black coffee, rye bread toast." Margaret laughed too and slowly began talking to people. Not much, but a little. Tom talked about his family and his daughter living in New York. Linda talked about her husband going fishing in the winter months. One day, Mark, the landlord, came to the door and asked, "How are you?" Margaret answered, "I'm fine, very fine." Mark asked, "Aren't you lonely?" And Margaret thought before responding, "No, for the first time in years, I'm not lonely because now I'm with myself." In the 5th week, Margaret noticed the pains, stomach pain, back pain, fatigue. She knew what they meant as the disease was progressing. But Margaret didn't take medication or go to the doctor. She just kept walking, kept writing, kept living. In the 6th week, it snowed, and Stonington turned white. Margaret went outside and walked in the snow, which was cold but beautiful. As she walked in the snow, she left footprints, and when she looked back, she saw a single line, a single trail. Margaret's trail. Days passed, weeks passed, and Margaret established a routine: morning walk, coffee, reading, writing, evening walk. A simple life, but a full life, where for the first time she was making her own decisions about when to wake up, what to eat, where to go, with no one to report to and no one to be accountable to. December came, then January. Her children called often asking, "When are you coming back, Mom?" And Margaret would say, "Not yet." They worried, but Margaret reassured them, "I'm fine, don't worry." At the end of January, Margaret looked in the mirror and saw the change. She had lost weight, but in a different way. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright. Her hair had turned whiter, but her posture was more upright. She was different. She was strong. In February, Margaret told Tom one day, "Thank you." Tom was surprised and asked, "For what?" Margaret explained, "For allowing me to be here, for not treating me as invisible, for just being normal." Tom smiled and said, "You're human too. Why would I treat you any other way?" When March came, 4 months had passed. The doctor had said, 4 months. But Margaret was still here, still living. There were pains, but Margaret didn't care as she walked by the ocean every day, living every day. In early April, David called, saying, "Mom, you need to come back now. It's been 5 months, and we're worried. We want to come see you." Margaret paused before agreeing, "Okay, come," and gave them the address. A week later, her children came. All 3 of them, David, Susan, Emily. When they got out of the car and saw Margaret, they were shocked because their mother looked different, thin but strong, pale but with bright eyes. "Mom," Emily cried out, and ran to hug her. Margaret hugged back, then David, then Susan. They were all crying. They went inside and toured the house. "It's small," David observed. "Yes," Margaret agreed, "but it's enough." They sat in the living room, where Margaret made tea, and for a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Susan asked, "Mom, why? Why did you disappear? Why didn't you tell us? What happened?" Margaret sat with her teacup and thought before speaking. 5 months ago, the doctor told me I was sick. Very sick. They said 4 months. I made a decision not to tell you because you would have come and gathered around me with hospitals and treatments. And I wanted to spend my last 4 months, not in hospitals, but here, alone, with myself. For 68 years, I always lived for someone else. A good wife, a good mother, a good worker, but I never lived for Margaret. When I had 4 months left, I wanted to live for myself. Her children froze. David asked in a trembling voice, "You're sick?" Margaret nodded and confirmed yes. "How sick?" "Very." Susan began to cry, and so did Emily, while David stood up, went to the window, and turned his back. "Why didn't you tell us?" David demanded, angry. "Because you would have tried to stop me," Margaret explained, "and I didn't want to stop." "You need to see a doctor," David insisted. "Right now, we need to go back to Boston." Margaret nodded in agreement. "Yes, I'll go back. But first I want to show you something." They went outside, and Margaret led them to the beach, where the sun was setting over a calm ocean under a pink sky. Margaret showed her children the ocean. "For 68 years, I dreamed of this view," she told them. "But I never came because there were always responsibilities, always duties. But for the last 5 months I've lived here, seeing this view every day and doing something for myself every day. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free." Her children were crying, and Margaret hugged them, saying, "Don't be angry with me. I had to do this." The next day, they returned to Boston, and Margaret went to the hospital. Same doctor, same room. Tests were done, and a week later, the results came back. The doctor looked at Margaret, looked at the file, then looked at Margaret again. "Mrs. Peterson," she began, "when I saw you 5 months ago, your condition was very serious. I told you 4 months, but now," she paused. Margaret waited quietly. "Now the results are different. I can't fully explain it, but there are signs of improvement." Margaret listened silently, trying to understand what was being said. "What treatment did you try?" the doctor asked, with genuine curiosity. Margaret shook her head slowly and said quietly, "I didn't take any treatment." The doctor looked puzzled and glanced back at the file before saying, "We'll continue to monitor you." When Margaret left the hospital, her children were waiting, and when she gave them the news, they cried with joy. Margaret cried too, but for a different reason. She cried because after 68 years, she had found herself, and she wasn't going to lose herself again. A year later, Margaret was still living in Boston, but went to Stonington every month, having rented the small white house again to stay for a week each month, alone, with the ocean, with herself. Her children now understood and would tell her, "Go, Mom, we're here, you go." And Margaret went every time, because Stonington was her place, the place where she was herself. One day Susan asked, "Mom, do you have any regrets about not telling us?" Margaret thought before answering, "No, I don't regret it, because those 5 months were the most important 5 months of my life. For the first time, I was just Margaret, and that was worth everything." The sun was setting. Margaret looked out the window at the ocean. She was still there. She was still living.